What if the smartest man in the world was a completely average guy from 2005? One lazy experiment, one forgotten pod, and 500 years later, he wakes up in a future so dumb, people water their crops with energy drinks and think lawyers get certified at Costco. But here's the wild part. This walking middleman is now humanity's last hope. What happened to evolution? And how did the world fall this far? The truth is way dumber and way darker than you think. At the dawn of the 21st century, humanity stands at a crossroads. Scientists, basing their predictions on the principles of natural selection, envision a future teeming with intellectual brilliance and cutting-edge technology. However, reality unfolds in an unexpected direction. Having secured their dominance at the top of the food chain, humans no longer feel the pressure to evolve, leading to an alarming trend: laziness and intellectual decline. The disparity in reproduction patterns further exacerbates the situation. Wealthy and intelligent individuals approach family planning with meticulous caution, often delaying parenthood to the point of extinction. Meanwhile, less educated populations multiply at an astonishing rate, setting the stage for a future where intelligence becomes increasingly scarce. In 2005, within a classified military facility in Washington, D.C., Army librarian Joe spends his routine shift watching television. His quiet life is suddenly disrupted when a senior officer informs him that he has been selected for a top-secret mission. Joe protests, having envisioned a tranquil retirement in his role, but orders from higher authorities leave him with no choice. Meanwhile, military officials deliberate on the ideal candidates for an unprecedented experiment. Their research team has developed cryogenic sleep pods, designed to preserve individuals for future emergencies. For an initial trial, they seek test subjects who epitomize mediocrity, individuals with no significant ties or dependencies. Joe, being the most statistically average soldier with no family, is deemed perfect for the experiment. They also require a female participant, but with no immediate options within the Army, they recruit Rita, a woman known for her involvement in private military events. As an incentive, she is promised an upgrade to her status and a clean slate for her past infractions. The experiment, highly classified, aims to place Joe and Rita in suspended animation for a single year. The next morning, they undergo a medical evaluation, during which Joe attempts small talk with Rita, who falsely claims to be a painter. As the procedure commences, Rita grows anxious at the sight of intravenous lines, but Joe reassures her, placing his trust in military authority. When she inadvertently references a certain upgrade, she hastily covers it up, leading Joe to misinterpret the name as foreign. Once secured in their pods, they are put to sleep and the lab is sealed off. However, unforeseen events disrupt the experiment's timeline. The colonel overseeing the project, along with Upgrade, is arrested on charges of illicit activity, resulting in the facility's closure and eventual demolition. Buried beneath rubble, the hibernation pods are forgotten, and Joe and Rita remain suspended in time. As centuries pass, human civilization deteriorates at an alarming rate. Efforts to combat intellectual decline through genetic engineering fail, as scientific resources are redirected toward trivial pursuits like cosmetic enhancements. Meanwhile, infrastructure collapses and waste accumulates for generations. Eventually, in the year 2505, an event known as the Great Garbage Avalanche occurs. A massive landslide of refuse engulfs the city, dislodging Joe's pod and sending it crashing through the window of a dimly lit apartment. Inside, a man named Frito lounges in a chair that doubles as a toilet, engrossed in a mindless television program. As Joe's pod activates and he regains consciousness, he is dazed and confused. His attempts to understand his surroundings annoy Frito, who promptly ejects him from the apartment. Disoriented, Joe stumbles through the streets, encountering a city unrecognizable from his time. Language has devolved into a crude fusion of slang, rendering effective communication nearly impossible. Storefronts and advertisements feature nonsensical and crude messaging, reflecting the decline of literacy. Eventually, he arrives at a hospital, its signage resembling a fast food restaurant rather than a medical facility. Inside, patients navigate their diagnoses using button-operated kiosks, as human interaction has become virtually obsolete. Seeking water, Joe approaches a fountain, only to be dispensed a neon-colored energy drink. When he inquires about actual water, a nearby man scoffs at the idea, explaining that water is reserved exclusively for sanitation purposes. The absurdity of his surroundings intensifies when he is subjected to a medical examination, which involves placing diagnostic plugs into various orifices, an experience made worse by the technician's careless mix-up of placements. In the examination room, Joe finally glimpses a magazine dated 2505. Initially convinced it must be a misprint, he soon realizes the truth. He has been in hibernation for 500 years. The doctor, struggling with basic reasoning skills, misdiagnoses Joe as mentally deficient and assigns him an astronomical medical bill of $5 billion. As the system fails to recognize him as a registered citizen, security is alerted, forcing Joe to flee. On the chaotic streets, signs of societal collapse become more evident. A giant digital clock displays the same time perpetually, suggesting that even basic systems have failed. Entertainment has reached new depths, with the most celebrated film being a 90-minute recording of flatulence. That evening, Joe witnesses a woman struggling with a vending machine. When she gives up, he attempts to retrieve the stuck food himself, but is immediately apprehended by law enforcement. Noticing his lack of identification, the officers deem him a criminal and, without hesitation, tackle him to the ground. Amid the commotion, he spots Rita's pod nearby, but his protest is silenced with a blast of pepper spray. Joe's trial is nothing short of a spectacle. Held in a cage, he is bombarded with objects from an audience that seems more entertained than concerned with justice. His defense lawyer, Frito, appears more preoccupied with personal grievances than legal strategy. The courtroom, plastered with garish advertisements, is filled with incomprehensible arguments, culminating in a guilty verdict. Meanwhile, Rita regains consciousness and attempts to contact Upgrade using a public phone, only to discover that a single call requires an exorbitant fee. A man approaches her with a proposition, which she skillfully exploits to acquire money before slipping away. The currency in her hands features ridiculous phrases and an unfamiliar face, further emphasizing how drastically society has changed. The next morning, Joe is processed for incarceration. When asked his name by an automated system, his attempt to explain his predicament results in "not sure," being permanently registered as his legal identity. He undergoes a basic aptitude test, which consists of elementary-level questions that baffle most test takers. Soon after, he is escorted to an overcrowded prison, where inmates are treated like livestock. Realizing the sheer incompetence of those around him, Joe devises an escape plan. Exploiting the guards' inattentiveness, he convinces one that he has been mistakenly processed for release. While the officer searches for documentation, Joe seizes the opportunity to flee. Security systems attempt to neutralize him, but due to poor maintenance, they malfunction and self-destruct. Under the cover of night, Joe returns to Frito's apartment, desperate to find a way back to his own time. He inquires about time travel, and though Frito confirms its existence, he initially refuses to help. However, the promise of securing a fortune through a bank account in the past convinces him otherwise. Before they can finalize their plan, authorities arrive at Frito's door. Joe quickly changes into a disguise, escaping through the window with Frito's reluctant assistance. During their getaway, they encounter Rita, still engaged in her con. Joe drags her into the vehicle and explains their predicament, prompting her outrage. As if their situation weren't dire enough, surveillance scanners detect Joe's presence, triggering a citywide alert. To make matters worse, their car's battery depletes at the worst possible moment. The trio barely manages to slip away before the authorities arrive, unleashing a relentless barrage of fight on their abandoned vehicle. The ensuing blast, though entirely unnecessary, draws an eager crowd. People cheer at the chaos, and before long, brawls break out purely for entertainment. After trekking for hours, they arrive at what was once a retail giant, but has now morphed into a sprawling megacomplex selling everything imaginable, including educational degrees. Frito nonchalantly reveals that he obtained his law credentials here. The store is so vast that a shuttle service is necessary just to navigate it. While waiting for their ride to the electronics section, Rita steps away to use the restroom. During her absence, Frito makes crude remarks about her, prompting Joe to intervene. Unfortunately, his movement triggers a nearby scanner, instantly broadcasting his face on every screen in the store. Panicked, Frito ditches Joe and jumps on the shuttle to escape. Within moments, armed officers surround Joe, dousing him once again in pepper spray before hauling him away. Rita, emerging just in time to witness the scene, opts to remain hidden. Joe is taken directly to the White House, where he meets the nation's highest-ranking officials. To his utter disbelief, an aptitude test has identified him as the most intelligent person on the planet. The cabinet, desperate for a solution to their crumbling society, appoints him as the Secretary of the Interior. Before he can object, the bombastic President Camacho arrives, scrutinizing Joe's head and expressing disappointment that it isn't larger. After all, big heads mean big brains. Seizing the opportunity for a grand spectacle, Camacho calls for a nationwide broadcast, announcing that his newly appointed genius, Mr. Not Sure, will solve every crisis within a week. The promise is met with skepticism, but Camacho wins the crowd over with a bizarre song and dance routine, followed by an impromptu beer parade. As Joe settles into his newfound authority, he persuades Frito to act as his legal advisor. In private, he presses Frito for details on the rumored time machine, but the directions he receives are frustratingly vague. Realizing he needs an excuse to leave the White House, Joe requests an inspection of the nation's failing agriculture. Everyone assumes Rita is his romantic partner, so the search for her is treated as a matter of national importance. Upon arriving at the barren farmland, Joe quickly confirms the soil is utterly depleted. Frito discreetly hands him a map to a supposed time machine location, but when Joe and Rita finally open it, they find it useless, a jumbled mess of scribbles. With no better options, they rejoin the group and soon discover the horrifying truth. The fields are irrigated with an electrolyte-laden energy drink. Further inquiry reveals that in the distant past, a beverage conglomerate successfully lobbied to replace water with their product, claiming it was better for hydration. This shift had catastrophic consequences. Plants withered, animals suffered, and human health plummeted. Joe spends hours attempting to convince officials to reinstate water, ultimately resorting to deception by claiming he can speak with plants, and they have expressed their distress. This peculiar argument sways the decision-makers, and under Camacho's command, water irrigation is reinstated. As the sun sets, Joe and Rita are given accommodations in the White House. Over the course of their conversation, Rita reveals that she has also been granted a full pardon thanks to Joe's influence. She offers to share the bed with him, but Joe, still believing she is an artist with a Dutch boyfriend named Upgred, declines. Days later, an enraged mob gathers outside the White House. The switch from the energy drink to water has caused the beverage company's stock to plummet, leading to mass unemployment. Protesters blame Joe for the economic collapse. An emergency cabinet meeting is called, where the furious CEO of the beverage corporation demands accountability. With tensions at an all-time high, Joe is arrested and sentenced to a rehabilitation program. Initially, Joe is relieved, assuming it to be some form of therapy. However, he soon discovers that rehabilitation is nothing more than a death match held in a gladiatorial arena, where convicted individuals are pursued by monstrous trucks designed to obliterate them. While Joe sits chained to a boulder, Rita visits him and realizes the situation is far worse than they imagined. Before departing, Joe pleads with her to locate the time machine and warn people in the past to value education. That night, thousands gather to witness the spectacle, including President Camacho himself. The pre-show entertainment is predictably disastrous. When the national anthem is performed, the crowd viciously attacks the singer. The event begins with two heavily armored trucks entering the arena, bristling with absurdly designed weapons. Joe, however, is given a flimsy, malfunctioning vehicle adorned with an unsettlingly suggestive decoration. His captors attach his boulder to the back of the car, but due to poor craftsmanship, a large chunk of the rock breaks off. As the battle commences, spectators hurl objects at Joe, showing no sympathy for his plight. Meanwhile, at the White House, Frito casually watches the event unfold while Rita gazes out the window. To her astonishment, she spots a single flower sprouting in the garden. Realizing that the crops are indeed growing under the new water system, she frantically convinces Frito to drive her to the arena. Along the way, they confirm that the fields are thriving. Back in the stadium, a third, even more intimidating truck enters the fray, wreaking havoc and partially collapsing a section of the arena. Joe narrowly avoids destruction as one of the initial trucks tears the roof off his car. The second truck slams into him from the side, causing a catastrophic pileup. Just as Rita arrives and attempts to reason with Camacho, a formidable warrior named Beef Supreme emerges from the wreckage, wielding a flamethrower. Desperate to turn the tide, Rita bribes Frito and a cameraman, urging them to document the flourishing crops. She then infiltrates the control room, tricking the technician into abandoning his post. Unfortunately, Frito and the cameraman become distracted by an adult entertainment venue along the way, delaying their mission. In the arena, Beef Supreme advances, igniting everything in his path. Joe's restraints are finally obliterated, allowing him to flee. Seeking higher ground, he scrambles onto a fallen structure and seizes a dangling microphone, delivering an impassioned plea for rationality. However, the audience quickly grows bored, and the event staff slowly lowers the microphone, forcing Joe back into the line of fire. At last, Frito and the cameraman stumble out of their diversion, only to engage in a senseless brawl that results in the camera tumbling to the ground. By sheer luck, it lands facing a lush green field. Recognizing his original deal with Joe, Frito hastily records the footage, which Rita broadcasts across the stadium's massive screens. As the image of thriving crops fills every display, the crowd gasps in disbelief. Joe braces for imminent doom, but just before Beef Supreme can incinerate him, President Camacho intervenes, declaring that Joe has earned his freedom. During the ensuing celebration, Rita confesses to Joe that she prefers staying in the future, having found unexpected success. Camacho, now convinced of Joe's abilities, appoints him as vice president. Though Joe initially refuses, the overwhelming pleas of the people persuade him to accept the role. Shortly thereafter, Frito smugly reveals the location of the so-called time machine. To Joe's horror, it is nothing more than a decrepit amusement park ride. Frito had fabricated the entire story for personal gain. Despite his initial disappointment, Joe ultimately thrives in his new position. Over time, he ascends to the presidency, implementing meaningful reforms and ushering in a new era of progress. He and Rita go on to have 3 remarkably intelligent children, securing a brighter future for the world. Meanwhile, Vice President Frito takes multiple wives and fathers an astounding 32 dim-witted offspring. Far away, in a forgotten pod, Upgrad's hibernation cycle finally ends, unleashing yet another relic of the past into an uncertain future. If you woke up 500 years in the future and realized you were the smartest person alive, what would you fix first? Do you think humanity's future is heading toward brilliance or buffoonery? And what would you do if the time machine turned out to be an amusement park ride? Drop your answers in the comments. We want your take on this dystopian disaster. And if you enjoy stories that are too crazy to be fiction, hit that subscribe button for more mind-bending videos every week.